What's next for IT? In today's economy, technology touches every aspect of the day-to-day operations of business. There has never been more pressure on IT to deliver for our organizations. So what can we expect over the next decade? We need to think differently about how we approach our work to continue to thrive into the future. This requires all of us to be intentional in how we look at our role going forward. Smart IT is an approach to getting the important things done by transforming the way we think, work, and lead. And now, let's disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk the smart IT way. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. Today, a great pleasure to introduce Carol. So Carol is on the show today to talk about one of my favorite topics, three-letter word for something that every business has been doing since the beginning of time. But in our modern times these days, with so many different risk factors coming in, we need to be more intentional in how we manage risk. So today I'm going to talk to Carol about enterprise risk management. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you, William, for having me.
So Carol, I think I've come to really learn about ERM in the last couple of years. Had the pleasure to do some training in ERM through Carnegie Mellon University. So I have an IT background, obviously, in cybersecurity. So when I started to look at ERM, I found myself really engaged with the topic. And as I started to look around the field and found out, you know what, not a lot of IT people necessarily know about it. You know, they may know about the compliance side of the house, but this entire breadth of ERM, the frameworks, the models, the approaches, there's a lot going on there. And I find that for IT professionals who might be more on the technical side of the house, you know, more geared towards putting fingers on keyboard and, you know, developing code, you know, deploying infrastructure, that's a good perspective to have, because in the Smart IT podcast, we really want to talk about the next decade. And a lot of this is dealing with aligning ourselves with what we do with the business. So when I started to Google ERM and enterprise risk management into the Google browser, I kept seeing the same name kept coming up over and over again. So I kept seeing the same face, same name, and it was you. So I said, Carol, why do I keep seeing you when I put ERM into Google?
So the answer to that would be I've been doing ERM for a while. I'm not going to say how many years because then that'll start giving away my age. But, and as I tell my son, you never ask a woman her age. So we won't go there. But I have been doing it for a while. And so for the last 7 years, I've been publishing a blog on enterprise risk management. So definitely feel free, those who are listening, strategicdecisionsolutions.com/blog. Go out there. You'll find about 300 articles right now on the topic of enterprise risk management and strategy, decision-making. Absolutely. So thanks for the little plug on my blog. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love it. And that's very useful. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's really a topic, and I completely agree with you. Technology people should absolutely understand the perspective of enterprise risk management, because the reality is that the business is there to make the money. Technology is there to support the business. And if technology people don't understand the business, you can't make the right decisions from a technology perspective to help the business in achieving their goals. Right? It's a partnership. It's not one department versus another department. There is definitely needs to be a partnership there.
I think where a lot of people might, you know, go adrift on ERM is that middle letter, right? The R, risk. So when we hear about risk, we're thinking about cyber risk, you know, the bad guys taking our infrastructure down, or maybe project risk, our IT project didn't deliver on time. So it's a lot of negative connotation with risk, but I like what you were talking about before with strategic decisions, right? So I guess let's step back and talk about ERM and really that role of ERM for helping a business make money, right? Helping make decisions, right? I think that's really where it lives. And I think we might spend a little bit too much time on just the negative piece there. So let's talk about the ERM role for helping the business, the C-suite, the board of directors do what they do.
One of my favorite topics. Okay.
Yes.
So, I think one of the key pieces that does get frequently overlooked is the thought that enterprise risk management is just yet another function within the business without realizing that there is a specific purpose to it and it overlays all business functions. And that is, it is meant to provide a necessary input into decision making being made by all business leaders. It doesn't matter what leader of department you are, whether you're over finance, whether you're over technology, you're over operations, communications, it doesn't matter. Um, it's really providing a unique perspective because you're not embedded in the day to day business. You are supposed to be looking at the bigger picture of the entire organization as a whole and really asking the tough questions that nobody else wants to ask, challenging assumptions that people tend to make when they're making decisions. We like to assume that things are going to go the way that we envision them in our heads. And in our heads, it's always a nice, pretty picture, and
Yes.
everything goes along flawlessly, right? But that is not reality. And so ERM is there to ask those questions around what assumptions are you making? What are the chances of those things actually occurring the way that we want them to be so that we can do this, so that we can be prepared and not be taken by surprise. We want to, whether it is not taken by surprise by an opportunity that could come
Yes.
before us or a negative action, right, that happens and we need to be prepared in how to respond. Either way, it's about proactively preparing and respond and being prepared to respond. So no matter if it's positive or negative.
Well, that's a good point because if the business want to do an expansion into a new market and it requires a new project, maybe a new digital transformation project that can accomplish that, and the line of business saying, "Don't worry, we'll get out in 6 weeks." That might be kind of important to really, I guess, what you said, challenge the assumptions that 6 weeks is going to be all you need, right? It's all the inputs you're putting into actually making that project go. So let's talk about these different inputs by different parts of the company. 'Cause the project manager got to keep everything on track. The technology people got to be there, but then it's all the pieces on the front lines, right? The people serving the customers, the back end, the back office, supply chain. There's a lot going on to make this new business initiative work. So everybody giving their assumptions when they say, how long will it take? And are there any competitive forces, any regulatory considerations? That's a lot of input. So start to talk about, everybody being too positive, right? And saying six weeks is all we need. Somebody need to raise their hand and say, let's challenge those assumptions there.
Absolutely, because one of the key things that I find that happens over and over again is that people give a time estimate and thinking that's okay because I can do it in 6 weeks if that's all that I work on for the next 6 weeks, right? I'm going to be heads down and I'm not going to work on anything else. What is the reality that you don't work on anything else for six
Yeah.
weeks? Slim to none. Because I can tell you, I can't work on one thing in a given day, much less
Yeah.
without getting pulled into something else. For 6 weeks, that's not going to happen, no matter what department you're in. So it's a false reality to be able to make that assumption. And so the other is that you're totally forgetting about internal dependencies. Yes, we can deliver on 6 weeks, but wait, we have to wait on this person to be available, or this project to be done, or this technology to be there, or we need this vendor to be available to help us. So in reality, you can't deliver it in 6 weeks. You can maybe deliver it in eight, whatever. After this point, right?
Yeah.
We need a lead time. People always forget the lead time that it takes to prep. You're never going to start a
Yeah.
project the next day.
Yeah.
Is that a common assumption? I mean, would you agree with that?
I would agree. And by the way, those are just the internal assumptions. What about the external assumptions? Because the person who came up with the idea for this business initiative assumed some type of return on investment or some assumption that the client would like the product, the consumers would buy it, they would make this amount of money. So let's start talking about ERM's critical role on talking about those external risk factors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's when you start talking about Are we relying on any third parties to be able to deliver on this project? For not just the technology side. Let's, if it's an actual product, are you relying on getting parts or supplies from other companies? Are you relying on any transportation needs? Are you relying on being able to reach a certain market? So are you going to have a partnership with another organization to be able to reach a new market or to be able to repurpose a product for another purpose, right? So that being the case, there's a lot of external dependencies that you haven't necessarily factored into it. Is that company that you're going to partner with, are they going to be ready in 6 weeks to be able to help you? You need to go talk to them. Um, are your if you need financing to be able to finance all of this, are they ready? Have you talked to maybe your major investors to find out what do they feel about you going into this new market or offering this new product? Are they okay with it? Is that how they would want their money to be spent? Maybe they don't. Key stakeholders, external stakeholders need to be talked to. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, you need to be talking to your regulators. You need to be talking to any other organizations that have high levels of scrutiny on your organization, right? A lot of people forget about this idea of doing your due diligence before you start working and planning, and incorporate that as part of your planning before you actually say, yes, we can do this. First, it's all about finding out, okay, we have a great idea. Let's find out what would have to be done in order for us to execute on it, right? Because that should factor into it. And a lot of people would say, that's not enterprise risk management.
Mhm.
You are actually helping to address the risk before it becomes a risk, right? I would almost consider that to be proactive instead of
Yes.
waiting for people to say, we're going to do this, and it gets approved by the leadership, and now you got to manage the risks. And it ends up affecting time, budget, schedule, right? So,
So this really kind of points out the factor that it's really quite embedded, right? So I think some people associate ERM with just compliance or check the box or after the fact, and they think it's kind of a bolt on. So it feels kind of clunky. But if you didn't even mention the word ERM, I mean, every businesses when they started for the beginning of time was looking around the corner, right? Do I have enough supplies? Can I meet the needs of the customers? If they want to buy X amount, can I deliver X amount? Can I do all the things necessary to do it? So they were like managing risk in the background without necessarily calling it. And sometimes when you present it, it's like, oh yeah, that's just regular business management. Like even cyber risk, right? It's business management. We're managing somebody disrupting our ability to meet the needs of our customers. So it's fascinating when people think about it as a separate bolt-on. And we start to think about, can you implement an ERM program? Then they start really thinking about externalities. It's too complicated. It's too expensive. So let's talk about ERM. When someone's talking about, let's go build an ERM program. And I'm thinking, oh, that's too expensive. It's too much trouble.
oh, I get asked this a lot. Okay, so I do think that you did nail it on the head. Enterprise risk management is truly meant to be business management. And prior to the 80s and 90s, leadership was already doing all of these things. But then the world started moving faster and changing faster, and leadership started always having to put out fires, and they stopped being able to plan and act and think ahead and be more intentional with their decision making,
Yeah.
right? They become more reactionary. And so I think in order for enterprise risk management now, it became this way because of what happened 40 years ago and the changing in the business world. It should be embedded within the organization. However, most companies, most organizations, no matter for profit, nonprofit, the business is in the habit of operating as the business. And usually you need somebody that's kind of looking in just to help them get used to the new routines. But you have to establish what those new routines should be. Because for the business, it's, well, we're doing it this way because this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
So when you start, if you think about something that just runs along really smoothly, then you interject something that starts bumping, right? And eventually it'll go off path because you need to change the direction of the business. You need to change the routines. And that's really what ERM is meant to do, is the routines aren't that great because you're
Yeah.
not being proactive. You're not thinking about certain things. So by throwing that in, you're changing the way the business is operating. And the goal is that hopefully you won't need a separate ERM because the practices of risk management are embedded within the organization. But a lot of that does
Uh,
depend on how much leadership embraces the concepts and the practices of ERM. If they put it into its own little box and say, okay, here's ERM, they're going to
yeah.
come and present to us today, then it's
Yes.
not going to be embedded within the business. It will forever be a separate practice that comes in and at a snapshot does certain things. And the company will get limited value out of that. It is what it is. Do we want it to be that way? Absolutely not. We would love for it to be embedded within the business. But I will say that ERM has changed over time as well. When it first came, even if you look at ERM 10, 15 years ago, the practices back then were very much, this is all about risk. We're going to mitigate our risk. We're going to manage it down to nothing. We don't want any risk, and really encouraged organizations to be very risk averse. Um, and there has started becoming a movement in the last few years where ERM should not be about that. Be more fluid, be more adaptable, stop being so rigid, and encourage the business to take risk, because otherwise you're going to manage the business out of business is what you're going to do. And so I am one of those that is very much for a concept of enterprise risk management, being within the business, supporting decision making, being very fluid and adapting to the way that the business operates. Um, but it needs to be helpful, right? And then you need to, it's a partnership, just like technology should
Yeah.
be a partnership with the business. Risk management should also be a partnership with the business. Um, Personally, I've kind of gotten to the way
Yeah.
where I think about it as it shouldn't be risk management, because for two reasons.
Yeah.
One,
Yeah.
everybody always thinks about risk as being the bad part, and so they
Yeah.
forget about the opportunity side. And then the second is they think that, oh, well, you're ERM. That means that you should manage the risks. No,
Yeah.
no, not so much. That's
Yes.
the business. You
Hmm.
guys, and even technology, you guys own some risk too, because you guys have decision making. In a
Yeah.
way, the technology, departments are your own business area. You guys have to own the decisions and own the consequences of those decisions. ERM owns nothing. And a lot of people don't like that. It's like,
Yes.
we help with the practices, we help guide the practices. That's it.
That I think people in IT, specifically cybersecurity teams and CISOs, will love this because a lot of them are feeling the pressure that the business has offloaded all the risk from cyber onto their plate because they have the designated title. So we gave you your budget, we gave a team, we gave some tech. So now if we get hacked, it's our fault. I'm like, whoa, no, 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 no. This is, you still own the business, right? You still got to be careful about your username, password, how you handle data. That's people on the front line. That's their responsibility. Business still got to make decisions on funding the different control areas. So I think cybersecurity and security teams have been caught with this. Hey, they tagged us like it's our responsibility. That's producing a lot of distress, I think, for CISOs, thinking if they don't get if everything stays up and working, can you justify your budget? But then if you get hacked, it was our fault, not the person who gave out the credentials and the transfer the data that they shouldn't have. So I think CISOs will love chief risk officers and ERMs who might be feeling the same pressure. Like, hey, they tagged us. This seems like a trap here.
I have heard of the conversations where ERM tried to have this conversation around a situation, the business decided to move forward, and then something bad happens, and then they come back and like, well, where was ERM when all of this happens? Like,
Yeah.
We tried, but we can't make them do anything. They are the business. We are not the decision makers in this. We are the information providers. It's all that's what we are. Um, so I completely understand the that concept. I'm going to go back to the cyber risk for a moment because one of the funny stories that I always hear about is, yeah, we're so focused on cyber risk, and then I ask, so what is your procurement process like for to any kind of software that a business needs? But oh, each business can go out and procure their own, and then and
Yeah.
IT's like, I have no idea what software exists in the business. Like, then how do you have an idea of your cyber risk? You don't,
Yeah.
right? So you have this um, two different communications that are getting said. We're really focused on cyber, but we have our business processes that are this, and we don't enforce things, right? So you can't do both. You have to be in sync. And so if the business truly understands what cyber is, then they wouldn't be going off and saying, you know what, I need a new project management software. I'm just going to sign up for Monday.com
Yes.
and I'm just going
Yes.
to do that and nobody knows about it. I'm just going to put it on my credit card, my corporate credit card. Everything will be fine, right? No, it won't be fine. So it's a little pet peeve of mine. Sorry. I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah. We call that the shifting the accountability to the wrong place. It's like
Yeah.
how do we get responsible for this? So let's. Well, that was kind of the nice, I guess, hope for ERM, right? To take cyber risk, take IT risk, project risk, financial risk, balance that off, right? So earlier you talked about taking enough risk to stay competitive market wise. Also making sure you keep the C-suite out of jail, out of the news for the wrong reason, making sure everybody gets paid on time, and making sure the company survives. That's a lot of balancing acts. So when I see ERM, this is a great place to like centralize some of the what you call it, role, not minefields potentially, but have guideposts and guidance for decision support across the business, right? It's like we're going
Absolutely.
to signal it, we're going to do it in a timely manner, we're going to embed it. So you're talking about initiatives and growth, adding more headcount, expanding mergers and acquisition, new products. We're listening. We're going to advise. We got some processes in place, programs in place. Let's support those decisions as they happen day in and day out. So I think that's where a lot of companies are struggling because they think, okay, we got to do ERM. We're going to do ISO 31000, COSO. It's going to be expensive. We need a chief risk officer. And all of a sudden, it's like it's for the elite, right? The top 5 to 10% of the companies can do ERM. It's too expensive for everybody else. So let's talk about ERM like for everybody, right? So anybody has a business, single person LLC, they got to manage risk as well, right?
Yep.
Compliance, regulatory. So let's talk about how do you operational ERM, even if you're not doing the big boys of ISO and COSO.
So the first thing would be going back to what we talked about earlier, right? About being willing to ask hard questions. So let's talk about the assumptions. Let's talk about reality, and then ask the preparedness questions. How are we prepared to respond if something doesn't go the way that we want it to go, or that we think it's going to go? So that's part of it. The other part is set a threshold for if you know if it's going to cost this much money to make, if I made a decision it's going to cost X amount of money, I need to examine this decision a little bit more, and I need to stop and not make an impulsive decision or a gut feeling on this decision, and get somebody else's perspective. So it can be as simple as, well, what could get in our way of achieving what we want to achieve with this thing that's in front of us? What could help us along the way, but maybe we're not prepared to take advantage of it, right? So either way, you've got to think about both sides of the coin, and that's a key piece of especially how we approach ERM is thinking about both sides of it, not just the negative, but also the positive. Um, I think a lot of organizations have opportunity in front of them every day they are not prepared to take, and so it just floats right on by. So we'll save that for another conversation. Um, but the other piece is it doesn't have to be complicated to assess your risks. If you're a small organization, don't feel like, my gosh, I have to build out this whole framework to assess my
Yes.
risks. Is it better to? Absolutely. Do you have to? No. That is part of the reason why organizations start simple, and over time they can get to something more sophisticated. But you work with what you can do. I'm a huge proponent of, when I come in to help my clients, I'm going to meet you where you are now. I'm not going to say, well, you're here. Well, I'm up here. So I'm going to make sure that you have to be here for me to be able to work with you. So I'm going to pull you up real quick and
Yeah.
you're going to be totally outside of your comfort zone from the first get go. No, there's no point in that. So you have to meet the people where they're at. And if they are needing something simple and straightforward and not complicated, okay, do that. That's fine. Is it getting them the information and the insights that they need to make a good decision? That is the big question of the day. And if the answer is yes, then you're fine. That's really what
I
it
love
comes
that.
down to.
I love that. So it is possible without a huge budget and hiring a chief risk officer, big team to come in there and say, hey, we have official maturity level 5 with our new ERM program. Now we can go do what we need to go do. I think people need to hear that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to do a little mini plug real quick. I've got an article on my blog that I wrote several years ago about
Mm.
ERM on a budget, and it is possible. So, somebody wants to go out to the blog, they can do a quick search for ERM budget. That article will pop up. And it gives them like 7 ways that you can make ERM possible. Is it the quote unquote ideal? No, but it is possible for you to do it. And it's a good starting point. So I don't want people to ever think, oh no, we have to be a much bigger, more sophisticated organization to be able to do this. No, no, no. This is something that a mom and pop shop could do in reality, because it's all about good decision making.
Now let's talk about making good decisions when everything's much, much faster, right? We talked about this a little bit earlier about there's more decisions to be made, more input. So when you got more decisions that have to be made, more compliance, more regulatory, cyber threats, you got this push to gain talent. You're competing with your other folks in the marketplace for the right talent. Got to keep workers motivated. So there are a lot more things on the plate now just to do something simple. And virtually everything you want to do in the marketplace today requires some type of technology, right?
Of
Some type of new
course.
coding, and you code, you get more devices. All these devices produce a lot of data. You got data sitting everywhere. And then when you're interacting with customers and you're making use of the data for your business, now we're getting to data privacy. So now we're getting more and more inputs, more and more variables, and then shorter decision time point, but more things to consider. So now we're starting to think about systems now here, right? So now financial risk, emerging risk, market risk, cyber risk. Now all of a sudden it could be any of these components affecting another one, and now you can't even visualize this, right? It's like holy crap. 'Cause at the end of the day, the business care about risk because it could take money out the bank, right? It could lose $1 or more, and that's what they're worried about. So now let's talk about all this technology that all these businesses are now reliant on, right? Have to work to the cloud or on a data center. All these third parties are helping to manage this technology stack. Just talk about this overwhelming nature of something the business that don't normally understand is all this tech, and then it's affecting everything else across the board.
So I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So and I'm going to say this as a small business, right? That yes, it can absolutely be overwhelming. When I start getting all of these notifications of I got to do this and I got to do that, my gosh, really? Okay, we're, the tools that we decide to use are migrating to something else. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, I have to go set up two-factor authentication from, so okay, got to communicate that to my team. And what do I mean? So there are a lot of things that hit us every single day, no matter what size your organization is. And so when it comes to the technology piece of it, it really does matter to understand, what are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? And you know what? Go find an expert that can do what you're not comfortable with. Yes, it will take money, but is the is the other scenario acceptable? Right? That's the question that every business owner, business leader should be asking is if this is not what I'm good at and I try to put my skills at it, is my good enough truly good enough for this organization? Right? Is it putting the organization at undue risk because I don't have the expertise needed to be able to do good enough? Um, so I think that's a really great, easy, right, gut check on, oh yeah, so and so can take care
Yeah.
of that. Can they really? Not really, you know. So it's just one of those pieces that no matter what size of your organization, the technology is going to get overwhelming. I'll just flat out tell you, it will get overwhelming. Whether it's for your leadership or it's for your employees, it will get to be a lot, and how they all interact together. But you have to know where your limits are. Whether you are within the business and you are an individual contributor or you are a business leader, you need to know where your limits are so you can offset that and have somebody that can complement you. It's not a bad thing to admit that is not my strong suit, because you know what? I got hired to do this over here because I'm really good at this. I didn't get hired to do this, right? Um, that's just smart resource allocation
That's
and
interesting about, yeah.
risk management. It's good risk management practices.
And what's interesting about that, that leads to another new emergency area of risk, which is third party risk management now. So we now identified what we're not good at. So we're going to offload it to somebody else.
Mhm.
So now you're offloading more and more things. And technology is a lot of technology that's off. We don't even have data. A lot of companies don't have data centers these days or full IT teams because they offload it to like cloud providers like Microsoft, Google, AWS. So somebody else is doing it. And
Yeah.
then maybe you don't have as many developers in house as you need to do your new mobile app. So you offload that. And all of a sudden, they went from a spreadsheet of a small number of technology outsourced providers to a lot. Some larger organization may have hundreds and hundreds of suppliers, third party, just in technology, added on top of all the vendor suppliers. So now we have this big explosion of third party risk management. So it seems like no matter what we do, we're shifting risk in different pieces. So, so it seems like when you have a very ad hoc ERM program or none at all, that's where you have the trouble because all of a sudden this looks like it's very complex and there's no order to it. So let's talk about ERM having that framework, even a basic framework, allowing you to handle those different types of risks. So you shifted some things internal to external, third party risk management going up, maybe handling more with suppliers, but it's helping you reduce risk for being too slow to the market. So you're helping with the market risk and driving that down. So let's talk about the advantages of that framework from ERM to provide that, kind of a balanced look.
Yeah, absolutely. So, completely understand it does start to get a little overwhelming of all these different types of risk and the different risk management programs that and functions that can happen within an organization. I think that's part of the reason why ERM can be so valuable is because it does provide boundaries, right? And it provides kind of the not just the outside boundaries, but the lanes where organizations can be. So if I said, like, if you take like a puzzle, right, and you do
Yeah,
typical puzzle putting together practice
yeah,
is you do the border first, right? So there's your border. So you find all your outside pieces with the square edges and you put those pieces
okay,
together and then you start putting all these little, oh, I see the pieces that go along with this piece on the puzzle. And then I'm going to put together this side over here. And so you work on it. It's the same concepts with risk management functions within an organization. They will all come together. It takes time, and that's okay. Nobody expects you to, from 0 to 60 days, have a fantastic third
yeah,
party risk management
yeah,
program.
yeah,
Um, and if they do, they need to go get their head checked. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah,
Um, It doesn't matter how good your internal team is or a consulting team, they're lying to you if they say they can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just go ahead and lay that out there for you. I would never commit that to a client because that is just false and wrong.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, so from that perspective, the thought of a third party risk management program should really be just a subset of third party management, right? I mean, you need to manage all of the third parties that your organization is working with,
Yeah.
and the risk part of it is only a subset of that. It's not going to take care of your procurement process and bringing on the third parties. It's not going to take care of your due diligence, although due diligence is a part of managing your risk around third parties, but I won't go that
Yeah.
deep. So
Yeah.
then you've got your
Yeah.
contracts, right? You've got your risk management, understanding what services are they going to be providing. Is that the right fit? Is that third party going to be the right fit for the service that you need? um, what about characteristics of that third party? Are they financially secure? Do they have a good track record? There's different components of it. You're managing the risk associated with not just that third party, but also the need of the organization, right? And is that third party provide actually fulfilling that need? So there's multiple components to it, but it's part of a chain of work that goes along with third party management. Third party management is also labeled as vendor management,
Yeah.
supply chain, all those good labels, but they all do have very specific meanings. So I do want to be very clear on that vendors are truly vendors providing a product or service to an organization, right? Supply chain is when you think about a product, no matter if it's a product or service, you've got a distribution and you've got suppliers. And so supply chain is part of the supply and then
Yeah.
going out to the customer. But it's not necessarily a vendor that is providing you a technology, right? It's not necessarily the vendor that's coming in and cleaning your offices. They are
Yeah.
not part of your supply chain. So there is a difference between supply chain and vendor management. Third party actually wraps in another element to it, and that is any party outside of the organization that you are working with,
Yeah.
right? So it could be partnerships that you're not necessarily required to do something with, but you've decided to partner. So if you've got, a sponsorship, you're a nonprofit and you decide to work with this organization who's going to sponsor you. Yay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You have to manage that relationship, and there is risk associated with that
Yeah.
relationship. There's reputation risk. Now you're financially reliant upon this organization to provide you with funding for you to be. I mean, so there's a lot of different components, but there is a difference between those three. What I don't want to happen is that uh, to your listeners, for them to feel like, oh my gosh, that is so much information. My mind is literally exploding.
Yeah.
It's baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. Usually, what organizations find easiest to tackle first is, do they have a physical product? Then, usually, supply chain is the best way to go first because they need to understand who are they relying on to be able to deliver the product they are selling for revenue, right? If they don't have a physical product, do vendor management. If you are significantly reliant on other companies to provide services to you for you to be able to function as an organization, right? If you've outsourced major functions of your business, understand who those vendors are, please. Pretty please. But all of these are components of how you're managing the risk to the organization, which makes it part of enterprise risk management.
But some people thought, hey, when you do risk management, there's one option is to do risk transference. Hey, Carol, we don't have to worry about any of this stuff. We just hand it off to somebody else, and something bad happens, we're off the hook. But then they found
Nope.
out, oh, if the third party messes up and we can't deliver to our customers, the customers are mad at us. not the third party. So it's not like even in life, right? You really can't transfer responsibility and accountability from each individual, each organization. It's theirs, right? The stakeholders own it, always going to own it. They can shift around, like, we can do cost savings by doing it externally, but if we bring it back in house, that's a cost implication. So these trade offs sound, once again, basic fundamental business management, right? Business functions. Um, and for the audience to make sure they understand, since we're looking under the hood, it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts, but we're used to that in technology, right? Everything we have in the data center, cloud, is a lot of moving parts. We're used to that. So it's our job to hide all this complexity from the end user, right? So if the end user actually knew all the stuff that we do behind the scenes to make it work, right? All they know is we provide services at a cost, and of course, that's cost in the background we take care for managing all this stuff, vendors, people, process. But we provide you at a certain price. It's just amazing to be under the hood. But this audience can handle that level of complexity. So I'm happy they'll say, hey, we can handle multiple components, parts, people. But one thing we do need to do is, I think, probably get away from spreadsheets. I think a lot of us are still relying on spreadsheets to manage like 1,000 vendors. Or if we want to do show me all your risk at an enterprise level, we're still showing spreadsheets. So have you seen anything on the horizons that's going to help us get off spreadsheets and actually use some nice software to help out here?
The risk management software, there's a plethora of companies that are out there to help you. And so the reality of being able to find a tool to be able to help you get off your spreadsheets, please, I will be with you. Please get off the spreadsheets.
Yes.
However, going back to that whole ERM on a budget, it's understandable if you're just starting and you need to use that as a simple organization tool. I'm not going to knock it. That's just the reality. I'm not going to knock it. But I do think that it is very important that once you reach a certain stage, you definitely do need to get off the spreadsheets. One, because you've got user error that's all over the place. You've got no historical information because you can't track what you change
Yes.
in an Excel
Yes.
spreadsheet, right? And goodness knows you don't need a different version, please, for every change that you make. That would drive everybody insane. And so when it comes to it, it really does depend on understanding what the business needs from a risk management perspective, right? Um, One of the things that we actually help our clients with is understanding what those business functionality requirements are before you go out and just Google risk management software or enterprise risk management software,
Yes.
because you'll get the list and you'll get the sponsored list up at the top, right? People always click on those and they're like, oh, that looks pretty. I'll reach out to them.
Yeah.
And then they sign a contract and then they find out it doesn't really do what they thought it was going to do. And I hate to hear those stories because that software is not cheap, by the
Yeah.
way. Not cheap at all. Not the big players. We're talking high five figures into the six figures, not including implementation, and that's on a yearly basis. Not cheap, right? So there's so many good small to mid-sized risk management softwares out there that don't get a lot of play in the market because everybody talks about the big boys. And so I tend to like going and talking to the small and mid-sized companies because they've got some really great stuff that's out there. And for the customer, they're willing to listen to you and they will
Yeah.
take your suggestions and they will prioritize your stuff and they will actually do what you've asked. It's amazing, the
Yes.
concept. So I think those are key components that often get overlooked in today's market of risk management software, but there's so much out there. So much out there. So whether or not you want it to, what the different types of reporting styles you want, do you want to be able to have the business do it, or do you want to manage it internally within your risk management area? That's You can go either way. Whether or not you want other functionality to also be included. There's a lot of softwares out there that label themselves as a GRC tool for governance, risk, and it depends on who you talk to. It's either controls or
Uh,
compliance. It can vary, but a GRC tool versus a true ERM tool. You've got some that are risk and strategy, which I love because it should be two sides of the same coin, right?
yeah,
Should have risk embedded in strategy and vice versa. So thinking about that tie, um, you need to be able to track metrics to go along with your risk, because as your program matures, you're going to need to be able to tie business metrics to your risks and start getting into mitigation plans and action items. So it's not just we need to create a list of risks. There's other things to think about. And if you're just starting or you're fairly new to the risk management field, you don't know what your program should have 2 or 3 years down the road. But your software needs to go ahead and be able to support that, because you don't want to change your software every year. That sounds horrible. I might get some gray hairs just thinking about that.
yeah,
But one, it's just way too much time. It's too much expense. And yeah. So you need to be
yeah.
thinking ahead about what your program's going to look like 2 or 3 years down the road when you go find a software. It's not just about a spreadsheet helping you right now.
Well, it's interesting you talk about like the cost and complexity because in IT we talk about shelfware. They went out and bought something, great promise, and then a year later it's halfway used. 2 years and now they're looking to replace it, which is horrible. Which
Yeah.
is almost another risk in it itself, right? Our program and our understanding of the business integration wasn't sufficient, so we bought technology too soon, and now we wasted money and time,
Hmm.
which is like everywhere we turn, Carol, there's seeming more and more risk all around the corner. So it's like, what's going on here?
I know it.
No.
We could talk all day long, but I don't think your listeners want to hear us
Yes.
talk all day long.
There. Now, for our listeners, so somebody's in IT, cyber, maybe a CIO, maybe a CISO, looking at the next 10 years for career path. Do you see some of the more technical people looking to ERM, looking to be a chief risk officer? Have you seen any trends out there? I know some people may have a affinity for, they're on the process side of the house and looking maybe to look at ERM as a career path. What have you seen out there?
So I would definitely say that there is no limit or restriction on what background you have to be able to get into the risk management side or into the ERM side. You have people that are trained in risk management from college and that's what they do. You have people from operations that go into it. You have people from finance that go into it. People from strategy. I mean, they're all over the place. So no there's no boundaries around like, oh, you're from technology, you're not allowed in here, right? I think always getting fresh perspectives is really what matters. And if you are willing to learn and you can be adaptable, right? Because ERM has to adapt to the ever changing environment, internally and externally to the organization. If you're willing to be a leader, even if you're an individual contributor, you need to stand up and be a leader and be comfortable talking to the leaders of an organization. Um, that has always been one of the biggest pieces when it comes to being in risk management is you can't just say they're I'm so much lower in the
Yeah,
org chart than them. I can't say that.
yeah.
Yes, you can. You just find a nice way to say it, but you can say it. Being I've been an analyst and I'm going and talking to the CFO of a company. I got to give her difficult news, but if I do it
Yeah.
well, it's okay. And they're not going to take it personally. I'm doing my job, right? So, but being comfortable doing that does matter. And being able to tell a story about how you got from here to here and why you're bringing something to them really matters. So, so there's some soft skills that are related to it. I think the technical skills would just be an added bonus because then you can provide the greater insights when it comes to talking to leadership about, cyber or, hey, we really need to think about this from an IT project perspective. If this and this, we've got this over here in the business and we've got this, it just lends more depth to the conversations that you can have.
I
So
love it.
don't let it keep you from the ERM world.
I'm excited for what's next for IT. A lot of different paths here.
Well, I mean, the reality is that Every part of the business gives you new experiences, new perspective, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to cross over into different parts of an organization.
Hey, Carol, I think that's a good place to stop there. We could talk for a couple of more hours here on this topic. I think we're good for introduction for the Smart IT audience on ERM, some of the challenges, the benefit to the business, and potentially, different career pathing for people who are more technically minded to get on helping the business manage risk at a larger level. So I'd like to say thank you, Carol, for being a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
All right. This is another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. If you need more information, go to williamreed.info. And until next time, hey, take care. Thanks for joining another episode of the Smart IT Podcast, where we explore what's next for IT and disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk together. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments. And for more Smart IT wisdom, check out my website at williamreed.info.